Hey everybody, it's Joe from Gadgetry Tech, and I have a pretty fun video today because we're going to talk about a couple products from a website called APOS Audio. I will have a link in the description below to help you find these products if you want to check them out more and to navigate that website. They sell a lot of different stuff on audio products, but they also carry some really cool peripherals and ways to customize your desk, whether it's desk mats, custom keycaps, new keyboards, etc. So there's some cool things they carry. Give that a look, but today's focus is going to be on the Audio-Technica R70x Refine, which is the collab with APOS Audio, and then the Gremlin, which is a tube amp also from APOS Audio. Now, both of these were sent to me for review. It won't affect what I say about it because, frankly, that's not how I want to run the channel. I present a lot of scientific and objective information in addition to my own subjective take and what I feel about the product. So take that for what you will. I always try to keep it honest though, and regardless, it's just my opinion. And if you do some research and you hear what other people have to say, always weigh that in because we're all going to have different preferences and experiences. So let's focus on the R70x because this is a super slick headphone. One, it has a price cut, and when you compare it to the original Audio-Technica R70x, the R70x that came out before was $349. The Refine is only $299. Now, fortunately, I have the original R70x, and I will be making some comparisons to it. So first, I want to show you the top-down view because you can see there's a different grille design. One of them is a little bit more revealing. The gold kind of masks it just a little bit. And then you have new pads. So the biggest difference is going to be the pad. Otherwise, they're essentially the same headphone, and I will show some measurements and objective data later. They have the same headband design. They have the same little suspension tabs, and they both have the same crazy lightweight. They weigh like nothing on your head. When you pick them up, it's one of the first things you notice, aside from the looks, of course, is how light they feel on your hands. And then when you put them on, they also feel like they don't weigh anything. There's like no pressure on the top thanks to these little self-adjusting like little tabs, if you will. And then it looks like a symmetric design, but when you look at the cups, it'll be labeled left and right. Part of that is because the cable, which can be confusing if you didn't know this fact, but there's multiple pins here, or bands. The left and right channel is transmitted on both terminals. So the reason why, at first I got frustrated, I'm like, really? They don't label the cable left and right? How do I know which one is which? So I would just guess and be like, cool, I guessed it right. Well, I had no idea that because of the way the cables are terminated, you can basically plug in either one on either side, and with the multi-pin system, it will automatically play the correct channel on that side. So there's no issues with trying to match it, literally just plug them in. They are proprietary like twist-to-lock stuff, and it's the exact same mechanism used on the original R70x. In fact, the reason why you only see one bag and one cable here is because the accessories are the same as well. You get the exact same 6-foot cord with the removable 1/4-inch adapter. You get the same like really nice like suede like bag. It feels incredible. And this material, so the big focus of this, it's not just the sound quality tuning, it's the pad. These pads are a little bit deeper, which affects sound quality, and it also switches material. This velour fabric is no joke. It feels really good. And the original wasn't like uncomfortable. It's just a slightly different material, which has a different sound characteristic, and it's a little bit thinner. Now, when I wear them on my head, even though they look thinner, they don't feel, it's not like my ears are getting, pressed against the baffle. The deeper pads are surely welcome, especially if you have larger ears. I would certainly recommend it for that alone. But it's not like this one was uncomfortable necessarily. The difference is these feel a little bit more plush. So they're like more squishy, which is nice for glasses, and they also have a slightly better skin feel. Now I do want to get into sound quality, but I want to start with something very, very important with this particular headphone, and that is impedance, because impedance changes a lot of things. Now there are headphones out there that are 32 ohm impedance, there are headphones that are 120 ohm impedance all over the place, 300 from Sennheiser, for example. These guys have an impedance of 470 ohms. Now, one of the things I wanted to check was, in addition to pads, because there is a sound change on the new Refine, I wanted to see if they made any changes to the voice coil or the driver in any way. These are both 470 ohm, and the sensitivity is 98 decibels. Now, both of those combined means the R70x does benefit from a more powerful amplifier. So if you're trying to power this off a 30 milliwatt dongle or something that's not known to have a lot of output power, well, you may not get the volume that you're looking for. There's no difference in efficiency with anything like that. Now, the other thing that changes is I do measure the impedance electrically. I do a sweep using Rue or Rooming Q Wizard, and I can measure the impedance curve of the electrical aspect of the headphone. because not a lot of people realize that the impedance changes on load on some drivers. So this guy is insane as far as impedance goes. So it's a nominal impedance of 470 ohms, but when you get in the bass region, the impedance spikes over 1,000 ohms. It's the highest impedance I've ever measured on a headphone, and it went off the charts of Rue. It turns out I can't even adjust the scale to show above 1,000 ohms because most products don't necessarily get as accurate when you're trying to measure that. So the developer was like, we're not going to go above 1,000 ohms because the numbers won't mean as much. Take that for what you will. Now, what this means is if you have different amplifiers, and in particular high output impedance like tube amps, it will change the frequency response when you have that much of a spike, because you're doubling the impedance at lower frequencies. Essentially, what happens is in these cases, the bass gets a little bit stronger. So if you hook it up with a high output impedance tube amp, it might sound a little bit warm, a little bit gushy, and compared to like the stock sound profile. If you're observing that, this is the electrical reason why, or like the actual property of the headphone that causes that. Now, because the electrical impedance is identical with both of these, it's pretty safe to say the driver's not modified in any way. They're all within a margin of tolerance because you do have drivers that will have a little bit of variance to them in production. And just for perspective, when I compared it to the AUN AR5000, which is rated at a much lower impedance of just over 50 ohms, that one was essentially flat. So that one won't really get affected by sound quality regardless of what kind of amp you have. So now that we know that electrically the voice coils are the same, and any change we typically observe here, it's going to be a byproduct of the pads and driver variance, because that does have a little bit of a factor here. Now, these measurements, it's based off my measurement rig. It's a Gross KB006 Pinaclone, using an IEC711 coupler. I have a ton of headphones and headsets I've measured, and I will have a link in the description below if you want to compare against other measurements. Now, having said that, looking at the sound profile, the R70x Refine is so good, and I will talk about the subjective side, so I'm going to try not to deviate too much from it. Just to explain what you're seeing, you do have a little bit of a sub-bass roll-off, super common with an open back dynamic driver, especially in this price range. They're not known to have insane amounts of bass, but there is a little bit of warmth here, and you do hear that as well, not just from a measured standpoint. Mid-range tuning is incredible. You can see it very closely matches Harman curve on my rig, and even if I look at the Keymar diffuse field, it's still right in line and very close to what we'd like. Now, this is a 10 decibel tilt because I like to represent it that way. It's a little bit more of a downward tilt for bass emphasis. It measures great on the rig. I have no real complaints with it, and what this means when you have it presented this way is you're not going to have any really odd tonality issues, like, you know, instruments are going to still sound rather natural. This recess that you have at 4,000 hertz or like 4,500 hertz really helps tame some things. Now, a lot of people perceive detail differently in this range, so this is a safer tune. It's not going to have any kind of measurable or observable shout. It's not overly bright or detailed sounding. It's kind of relaxed, and then you still have some decent upper treble, which is, again, this is all going to take me into the subjective stuff, but the sound profile measured is great. Now, when you look at the original R70X, this is the difference you see. Now, when you the bass is the biggest thing to observe. You have a decent amount more bass with the Refine. The mid-range tuning is nearly identical, and you have a little bit of a change between 5 and 7,000 hertz. Now, this change could be a byproduct of driver variance. I only have so many things I can measure. It could be a byproduct of pad variance as well, or just because of the pad swap. There's a lot of things to test here. I'm really trying to condense this video, but this is not super observable to a lot of people. What's more observable is by having a bass shelf on the R70X Refine, because of the pad swap, it makes the upper mids and treble sound just a little bit softer because now you're emphasizing the bass to go with it. Otherwise, they perform very similar to each other. Now, I did want to add the AUN AR5000 because everyone knows I've been really happy about that headphone. I've talked about it a lot in the past. I love that headphone. And you can see the bass profile is similar. Now, the sub bass is better on the AR5000, but not by much. You're only talking about a few decibels at really low frequencies. My R70X Refine on my head, when I listen to it, does sound a little bit warmer than the AR5000. You can see just a tad of emphasis here on the rig. I heard a little bit more than that. The AR5000 seems to have like a snappier, tighter bass with good sub bass extension, but this one just seems like a little bit more cozy and more bass presence in that warmer bass region, the mid bass, if you will. Now, there is a bit of a recess at 2,000 hertz, 1,500 hertz on the AR5000. followed by a stronger emphasis at 3K. There is a chance that sometimes there'll be a little bit too much bite to vocals. It can occasionally come across as a slight shout, but it's so minor on the AR5000. This isn't a bad tune in my opinion. It's also filled in more in the pinner region. So to some people, the AR5000 is going to sound more detailed because there's less of a gap when you look at like 5000 hertz. And then your upper treble is going to have a lot more variance ear to ear. So I don't want to spend too much time focusing on the upper treble because measurably they're so close that I think you can get both and have a different listening experience than others on the same two headphones. Either way, they're very comparable. I think overall the AR5000 sounds a little bit drier and occasionally more relaxed because of this whole 7 to 8,000 hertz. It just depends on the song you're listening to. They kind of flip-flop. I'm saying this because if you already have an AR5000 and you want yet another $300 open back dynamic, I don't think you're going to get a massive upgrade here. I would consider it a side grade for sure, but both of them are excellent. So take that for what you will. When we look at sound quality from what we actually hear and experience, the R70x Refine just gets better and better. And I wanted to have the original out because this isn't bad. Just because this is newer and I think more pleasing to people because of the bass shelf, it doesn't mean the R70x original version is necessarily bad. So if you have one already, just add a slight bass shelf to it, and I think you're going to get very close to the sound performance of this. You won't have the same skin feel of the pad, of course, but as far as resolution and clarity goes, as far as graininess and the treble goes, they are neck and neck, very, very similar to each other. The pads just take the edge off slightly, but that could be from variance, driver variance. Either way, I think the biggest difference is the bass shelf. The bass on both is great. It's punchy, but it's not as tight sounding as the AR5000. I think the AR5000 has a slightly, I don't want to say dry because it makes it sound like a bad thing. I guess it just seems a little bit snappier of a bass presentation. The bass is really fast, so like the attack and decay is a little bit quicker on the AR5000. But the depth of the R70x, and especially in the Refine, it has a little bit more like thumpiness and texture to it. And that warmer sound really sounds incredible for like rock music. It sounds great even if you're listening to symphony, live symphony recordings. It really doesn't matter what you're listening to because the tonality is excellent as well. Now, the Sennheiser HD650, 6XX, those are like the timbre kings. They still are. Things sound great in the middle, but as far as imaging and presentation goes, those are known to kind of have like the three blob effect. You have left, right, and center, and there's not a lot of movement around in your like virtual audio space. The R70x Refine and the AR5000 are like kings in this domain in particular. They stage exceptionally wide without cheating you to stage wide. It's not doing it by scooping so much of different frequencies and then blasting you a treble to make it sound like really bright and airy. It's doing it in a very cohesive way, partly because the frequency response is great. And I just love the way the R70x presents that. It sounds much more lively, much more engaging than the 6XO line, to a point where in a lot of cases, I would prefer to listen to music on this. I think that's a massive compliment because I've been very positive about the Sennheiser 6XO line. These are like more engaging and fun and slightly colored because of the warmth, but not so much that it's taken away from how instruments could, sound. They basically just have a little extra bass to them. More so than like what the reference sound would be from Sennheiser or maybe even in real life. I did find if you're like an EDM head or maybe even a person who listens to a lot of rap or trap music, I think the AR5000 still has a slight edge to it just because it's a little bit tighter and punchier, and I think the upper mid-range and treble extension, the way this one is tuned, happens to present things like synths really well. I was listening to Muse, the song Algorithm, and I preferred it on the AR5000, at least once it really picked up and that synth was kicking in. In the beginning, when the bass is happening, it's kind of like that thump. The Audio-Technica is still great. So I'm really splitting hairs here. This is the reason why I'm doing this is because this is a limited edition run. And just because it sells out, don't feel like you just missed out on an awesome headphone. You can always get the standard Audio-Technica for a little bit more and add a bass shelf, or you can get the AR5000 if that's sold out. This is a fantastic headphone, and I did a listening session with my buddy last night. He came from in town. He's like my main audio friend. We listened to probably about 30 headphones, maybe even more. We went from like, really cheap stuff to from under $100 to the Susvara Unveiled at $8,000. And I'm not saying this as a negative to the Susvara. It's a very special headphone. It's incredible, and I will be covering that. But on a lot of songs, he prefers the R70x Refine. And I could see why, and I agree, because that extra warmth and smoothness is just so rewarding to listen to. When I talked about the impedance before and how that affects sound, these things shine on tubes. You can still use solid state, but just make sure you have decent output power. I think they benefit from a more powerful amp. The amps from niche, like the Piety and the Pietus Maximus, are wonderful pairings to the R70. The shit Magni Uni at just under 200 bucks has a lot of power. It's a good value, and that will work with the cable that's included. I want to talk about the Gremlin, because this amp is an absolute beast of an amp. It's a DIY looking amp. It's priced accordingly. So I'm going to plug it in and then I'll talk about the amp more, because you just have to see it. Obviously you have this bright green glow, and that's not going to be for everybody. And then you have these beautiful tubes. If you don't want the glow, you can turn it off. So I'm going to pull this out, and now the LED is off. I have this little tab here I can kind of move, or I can leave it off. I just don't want to lose it. And now I just have the glow of the tubes, and it's still cool. It's definitely more of a DIY looking amp, and this is Class A. It's rated for a decent amount of power, and they say Class A, and based off the power consumption and heat, I can certainly believe it. I didn't expect a Class A amp to be this tiny or affordable, so you could take that for what you will. Now the photos of this, the original one on the picture showed it without this bracket here on both the front and back, these like little black things behind it. They reinforced the production unit to have less flex. I never even knew that was an issue, but they told me that the new one was upgraded to have less movement there, which is kind of cool. Now this comes with Ray tubes. I've talked about tubes before and on certain products, and the Ray tubes, especially when I did a tube roll on the X Duo amp I reviewed, also from APOS Audio. $120, and it comes with matched Ray tubes. That is a steal. And when you look at the sound quality performance, the big theme of this video, and the reason why I wanted to cover this together, is it brings up a really important topic of amp and headphone synergy. I don't believe in the snake oil of like certain amps are going to magically transform and give you this holographic soundstage and completely change it. Output impedance changes sounds, tubes change sounds, poor implementations can change sounds because you can add distortions and weird harmonics. You have different filters changing upper frequency extension. So to an extent, tubes and amps can change the sound, but it's not like if you get 10 different $200 solid state amp DACs, you're not going to have a massive difference between them all. The features and other things are more important. When you get something like this with tubes and a pure Class A balanced setup, it's going to color the sound just slightly, and the impedance behavior of this amp, again, will behave differently with different headphones depending on their electrical impedance curve. So there are things I want to point out that are really important with this guy, because it's fully balanced in and out. You can't just plug in a standard single-ended set of RCAs. You have to either use a 4.4 or an XLR input, so you need a balanced DAC. There aren't a lot of cheap balanced DACs. The best one I could find that was affordable is from Topping. You can buy this from APOS Audio or everywhere else, or anywhere else that sells Topping products. It's just over $100, and then you can get XLR cables to connect that unit to this. It's like 1/4 inch to XLR. So that's one way to do it. If you have another amp DAC that's already balanced, then just get good XLR cables and attach it on the back. The other thing that's kind of a bummer, I wish this came with a whole set as like a balanced one. These were two separate projects that just happened to work so well together, I think more by coincidence. So the Audio-Technica headphones don't come with a balanced cable. This doesn't come with a balanced cable, obviously. No amp DAC does. So in its default configuration, you can't connect these two together. Even though they sell it as a bundle, you have to order the balanced cable with it in order to benefit from these together. Now they do sell the collab cable that Zeos did. It's like $135, $140 just for the cable. It's a wonderful cable. I saw it at CanJam. I listened to that setup together. It sounds fantastic. It looks great. The purple, I thought was like a little much between the gold, the red, the purple, and the green lights. It's a lot going on. I ended up ordering a cable off of Amazon, and I'm not doing this to discredit that cable. It's just to let you know that there are options out there. This has the wood and gold. Yeah, I got it. I'll have a link in the description for this guy. I think it's New Fantasia, if I'm not mistaken. I don't even remember the brand, to be honest, but I thought this tied in really well between them. It sounds great, and I was able to use the Gremlin amp with it, and it seriously sounded insane. Like this is probably the best like $500-600 setup you can get once you consider the cables in a balanced DAC. It's so much above what the expectations are in this price range, and it really does sound like a full like end game setup. To let you know about tubes, so this comes with the core 12 AU7 tubes from APOS, and there is a switch, by the way. Like these work with two different tube types. There's the 12 AU7, and then there's a switch, a jumper here. You have to do it with it off and cooled off, of course, but you flip the switch to 6922, and then you can get those tubes instead if you want. If you're using the Ray tubes, the 120 comes with it. You can buy the Select tubes, which is like a premium upgrade, which is what I have installed right now. It does increase the price a lot. Those tubes alone are a lot more expensive by themselves, but you save $30 if you get it with a bundle with the Gremlin amp. The biggest difference I noticed, it wasn't drastic on tonality. These new tubes sound a little bit quieter. It behaved almost closer to a solid state amp DAC. And it sounded cleaner. I didn't observe as much like harmonic distortion. So some people are going to prefer one over the other because sometimes distortion, when done right, can make things sound pretty cool and different and fun. And that's kind of the magic of the Gremlin. So if you just want it to sound slightly more refined, a little bit darker, especially if you're turning it up, that was the biggest advantage of the Select tubes. If you're planning on tube rolling, then I really do suggest that bundle because $30 saves you a bit of money. That almost pays for the cables, so something to consider. Now this does get a little hot, so if you're ever going to work on it, I suggest obviously letting it cool off for a long period of time, and you do remove the cover to service it. Now I flipped my lid. I just want to share this from my ownership experience. These are 5.5 millimeter hex caps, so if you have that socket, it's great. The default configuration of this plate, and I can remove this while I'm talking, at least hopefully I can do two things at once, if you believe in me. So I'm going to remove these caps, and I'm going to flip it the other way because I want to show you how it comes out of the box, because there is a little bit of a recess on the lid. Now it looks cleaner when you flip it. This is the default configuration. So I'm going to line it up on the post here, and that looks great and everything, but the problem is when you put the caps on and tighten it, especially if you're not fortunate enough to have this little like 5.5 millimeter hex socket, if you will. Let's see if I can actually get this to stay. So when I tighten this, I'm not gonna like torque it down. I can't get to it with my fingers. And if you do like to swap tubes often and you're messing around with it and you don't always want to use the tool, well, my suggestion is I just flip it upside down, line it back up, and I can still tighten these enough to where it's like stable. Again, this is more of like a fun play with it type of amp DAC. If you're never gonna touch it, then you know, no harm, no foul, especially at the 120. But now that I've flipped it over, it can still tighten up, and I can undo it with my fingers. It just makes it easier to service. So a little tip from, you know, long-term ownership experience. Now I know I'm a little bit late to the party with this one. I really just wanted to wait until I could confirm how the R70x Refine compares to the original R70x, and I really wanted to get some more listening done in gaming and all that stuff. These are incredible for gaming. They're incredible for music. I don't think it's going to give you any kind of an edge in FPS gaming over the AR5000 if that's what you already have. But both of these to me are better performers than things like the Hi-Fi-Man Sundara, stuff I've heard from Beyerdynamic. The Sennheisers are excellent. These are just as competitive while also sounding better for games because it has a wider sound stage and having more sub bass. So I'm more immersed, I'm more engaged, I enjoy playing the game more, and I'm still getting all the details I need for tracking. So the whole imaging and presentation is great on them either way. Again, if you can't ever get this and you like a lot of the things I'm talking about with the R70X, you could still buy the Gremlin and just get a new R70X once these guys are sold out and unavailable. Add a little bass shelf to it on, you know, EQ, and it's seriously amazing. So on the note, I know I'm going to get asked about the FT1 Pro. I've had this, I've been testing it. There are some things I like about it. I would take the R70X Refine and the AR5000 over it, just to be blunt. This is still wonderful at 150, but there's a couple little things I'm not crazy about, byproducts of the weight with the headband not being thick enough, and I do have a little bit of driver crinkle. So I will get asked, just to answer it bluntly, the sound profile is excellent, but I prefer these headphones more. So with that being said, I didn't really want to script this one because this is kind of like a special project. I love what they're doing here. These are both bangers, and if APOS is going to keep releasing products like this that really kind of break the thresholds for value, and it's not just value, it just sounds good regardless of price. These are huge things to meet, and I'm really happy to see more competitive options coming from other websites. It keeps the market fresh and exciting, and these are like really unique, highly rewarding purchases. So I hope you found this video helpful. If you did, don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already. I'd love to see you at the next video because we're going to keep talking about a lot of good audio stuff. Thank you so much for the support and for making it to the end. Stay safe, and I'll see you next time. Bye.